Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So this one is really not going to be long, and I know that my wife always jokes me that my perception of time is here nor there. Nevertheless, I don't think this one is going to be long because this is not one of my typical long segments. Let me check myself first. Make sure it's up and doing what it's supposed to do. That's my checklist, my item. And sound is good. Perfect. I have a thought. Now, oftentimes, that's funny. Actually, I have a thought. Oftentimes, when I do these, like essentially a leading thought, I just kind of running with the leading thought. I often say that I will either delete this video if this video does not come out well, meaning I look at it and be like, oh, that does not get across what I'm trying to get across at all. Or for whatever reason, it's like, oh, that video looks kind of rough. I always say that because, you know, if it's horrible, get rid of it. I often don't necessarily do these live. I do these and just post them up. But I've started to do these live a little bit more. Still with that caveat that if this is bad, I will delete this video and pretend this video never took place. That being said, yeah, I always said that. And usually it's not true. Usually I just leave it. This is going to be one of those videos. If it's too horrible, I get rid of it. So anybody who's here live may see something fucking fantastic that nobody else sees. Have a fucking heart attack on screen. I'll be like, dude, I saw him croak on screen. He was like gurgling and stuff. But that being said, I've had a leading thought, and this thought has been, I've been thinking about doing a video on it for like a week or more, and never touched the video. Well, let's do it. I have a little bit of time. I have another video planned, but this is like a minor video of my other videos, so let's do it. I often say I'm further to the left than most, and oftentimes I don't know how often that is seen. Like I don't necessarily know how you get that across, like more of the left than you, other than some of the things that you say. I care less about the left in a namesake, to be honest. I use it more so just as a description of kind of certain packaging. This is a nebulous idea of what you're going to get when you look at this particular thing, and the typical description of this is we call left. So I say I'm further to the left than most. Most of the times you don't necessarily see that if we're talking about war, if we're dealing in politics, because we're talking about American policy and everything else. So let's put it on display to some degree here today. I consider myself to be somewhat of an optimist. Despite the cynicism, believe it or not. I may take a staunchly cynical view of the way I look at politics and politicians and their motives of states and governments and everything else. That is true. I may do that. But that's in an odd way powered by a certain amount of idealism with regards to what we as humanity can be. It's an odd dialectic of sorts. Yes, the cynicism is there, but it's powered by a certain degree of optimism. And I know that sounds weird. It's almost like those things are kind of living side by side. It's like, yeah, why are you cynical? Or how are you optimistic based on how things are going and how the affairs of humanity are proceeding? That's true. That being said, I look at what we can be, and I focus on what we can be to some degree. No, we're nowhere near. We're not even, don't even have the shadow of it. And if anything, we are going in an opposite direction from that to some degree, depending on perspective. What I would say is this. Looking at our system and the way our system is now, economic, social, and everything else, what we have the capacity to do versus what we do. My idealism comes from this idea of what we have the capacity to do. My cynicism comes from this idea of what we actually do. I hear people champion this thing of capitalism, socialism, all of these things. This is what I would say. If there is even one person in your society that's poor, your society has failed. That's what I would say. Now, I understand people would howl and they was like, hey, look at the number of people that are coming out of poverty and everything else. I would ask, yeah, but how many of those people need to be in poverty? What is your technological means from the standpoint of your society? Meaning, what is your society capable of doing versus what does your society actually do? A spaceman coming from another planet looking at the world saying, but they have so many resources. Why on Earth is 70% of the planet living off $10 a day? Why? Why does 30% live off $2 a day? Why are they ensconced in poverty when they have all of those resources and so much of the technical know-how to figure out to get rid of all of the poverty? Why do they allow so few to hoard so much? What mind trick, what gimmick are they using to convince people that this person is worth, for some reason, $100 billion, or this other person is perfectly okay sleeping on the street? What I would say to you is, if your society has the technological capability to make sure that each and every person has all of the things that they need for a basic life, and it doesn't provide those things, or it doesn't come up with a means of getting people those things, if you have one person in poverty and a planet that is ensconced in wealth, that wealth held in the hands of a very few people, then you have failed. You've failed. You've utterly failed. In the same way the capitalistic system condemns the communistic system, or socialism, whatever they want to call it. Look at the world that you have wrought. Your world is falling apart. Not just your world is falling apart, you have these socio-economic issues that are creating eddies and antagonisms between nations that are nuclear powers. If you have one person living in poverty, sleeping on the street, you have failed. You have the technological know-how right now to ensure that each and every person on the planet have all of the things that they need. This purely depends on what your interest and what your focus and what you put emphasis on. If I put emphasis on humanity and say that humanity is the most important thing on the planet, I say that because I am a human being. I'm biased to the issues of humanity. One of those issues that I'm biased to is where I live, my environment. Because without that environment, I don't have the capacity to live and grow and expand and do the things that I want to do as a person, as a human being. I am diminished in some way by the diminishment of my environment, so I want to make sure that that environment is sustainable. Now, I start from there. That's where I start from. So if I'm starting from that place and I'm looking out and I'm saying, hey, how do we ensure people have the things that they need, and that people are telling me we have this capitalistic system, this communistic system, and this socialistic system, all of these things based on purely ideology, none of these things delve into the details of how you provide for the people to make sure they have the things that they absolutely need. How? We can do it. The resources exist. Technological know-how exists. If you're not doing it, whatever you've arranged yourself, however you feel about it, it's a failure. It's a failure. If you're asking me, what do I want as a system? A clear delineation in regards to what I want as a system. I don't care about your system. What I care about is providing those things. In fact, even within a capitalistic system itself, those things can be provided. That's the mind-blowing part. The capitalistic system has the capacity to do those things. It just doesn't do those things, which leans more to my point that it is a failure. Does Bill Gates really need that much money? Does Jeff Bezos really need that much money? Whatever Jeff Bezos did, does it really equal to the point of equating to that much cash? Would Jeff Bezos have created Amazon or whatever else he created for $10 billion as opposed to $100 billion if the society was organized in a way in which $10 billion seems perfectly natural to give a person? Yes, he would have. Yes, he would have. Would human beings make a choice to go to war to fight for their country? Why are they doing that? What's the gain out of that? There's no gain for them personally. They're going into what you would consider to be shitholes. They're in horrible conditions, being shot at, being killed, sometimes getting their heads chopped off. Killing themselves, meaning they themselves killing other human beings, not something they will routinely do. Yes, there's some maniacs who get involved, but many of these guys get in with this idea of they're leveraging, the country is leveraging their bravery to killing other people for scrupulous ends or unnecessarily unsavory ends. Why are they doing that? Why? 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 Why would a person, why would a soldier, why would a human being make the decision to do that? They're doing it for a larger reason. In their heads, they've come up with a reason that there is a such thing as America, and in being a such thing as America, this legal fiction of a country, that they're going to go out, that the country itself is somehow embodied in the government of that country, meaning the human beings that are in there, the illegitimate human beings that have their own ends, that have nothing to do with what the rest of the country wants. But they don't know that. So they sign up. They've been told it was patriotic. They've been told their entire life that you got to honor the troops, that fighting in the military is this thing to do, that this is the thing that you're doing for your country. They're told that. They're indoctrinated with that from the time that they were born and faced a certain amount of propaganda when they got older, that this was the right thing to do. And so they did it. They signed up. They put on the uniform. And they go out and they kill. Or they work at the behest of a military organization that's going to kill abroad. Why are they doing that? Isn't that an interesting question? Why? Why would a person do that? They're doing that because they've been told to do it. They've been indoctrinated to do it. Something in them responded to that indoctrination to go and do it. The point I'm making here is that people do things for all sorts of reasons that go beyond their personal gain. Your society, the way it's organized in a particular way that's putting in a certain number of values, a certain group of values into human beings who are in that society. In this case, these tend to be capitalistic values that are self-replicating. Now, I'm making the point that in the same way that a military, that a person can make the determination to get into sign himself up, he's not doing so because he's getting material gain out of it. He's doing so because he's been told and propagandized to do it. I'm making the point that your culture, in many respects, can dictate the certain value system that are being attributed to the people who are in that society. And that's saying it is human nature to behave in the way that human beings behave is somewhat of a folly. It's somewhat of a folly. In different systems, people will behave in different ways. What were the Japanese like during the samurai period? What were the English like during the period of God, what are their names? Soldiers. They're not soldiers, though, the knights and whatnot. When those guys are deciding that they're going to go fight Islam and all this other stuff. I'm saying your society, in many respects, creates certain value systems that are attributable into people themselves. At some point, it becomes self-replicating. Those values can be changed. Those values aren't necessarily real. Saying that this is the only way for us to be is a folly. There's a certain group, certain elements of the society that have got rich magnificently off the sweat and the labor of everyone else. And they've hoarded that wealth for themselves mainly, given a little bit to bribe off the public so that public doesn't necessarily rise up and take their hits. They've been taking more and more and more of the shares, especially if we're talking about America. Now, the question becomes, why on earth accept the system the way the system is? And without necessarily going so far as to say, put a knife in capitalism or anything else. You already know how I feel about that. But even being reformist, even if you're looking at this video and you're saying, look, man, I don't necessarily want to go that far. Fair enough. But you understand that Jeff Bezos is getting $100 billion. He doesn't need $100 billion. He doesn't need that much cash. And to have a society or have a system itself that attributes that much cash to him means your society is broken. You have a homeless population living on the streets in Los Angeles and in California. You have a rural population. Even if we just talk about America, let's say fuck the rest of the world. Let's talk about America. 60% of the population wouldn't be able to afford a $5 million auto loan. This is the richest country on the planet. I'm getting to pass across to you that the wealth is not distributed equitably. It's not distributed in a way where you can make sure that the people at the bottom are not necessarily ensconced in poverty at the bottom. I understand that some people may look at this and say, well, dude, $1, I mean, what if somebody doesn't want to work? I don't care. There will be a faction of the world, a faction of the population that says, yeah, I just rather eat Cheerios and play Xbox. I understand. The overwhelming majority of the population is not going to do that. And not just the overwhelming majority of the population is not going to do that. The overwhelming majority wants something to do. They don't want to be exploited. They don't necessarily want to be in a situation where they're doing labor where somebody else is getting magnificently wealthy off their labor and they're barely making ends meet. No, they don't want to do that. But most people want to do something. So it's not a situation of, oh, people, if they didn't get any money, I mean, if people had their needs met, they wouldn't do anything. That's absurd. Why does Jeff Bezos get out of bed in the morning? Under that logic, why does Jeff Bezos get out of bed in the morning? Why does anybody who's rich get out of bed in the morning under that logic? Looks like they would just sit at home and do nothing. Having your needs met is not the same thing as you just not doing anything. For example, there are a lot of things that you take for granted that you have access to. You have access to electricity. You have access to roads. You have access to schools. You have access to all sorts of things. Did those things make you weaker? Did those things make you a better person? Those things made you a better person. I'm going to answer that question for you. Allowing people to have access to the things that they need frees humanity. It frees it. Now, Whether you want to say this is a capitalistic system, a socialistic system, I don't care. What I care about is making sure those things are met, making sure those criteria are checked, making sure on the list, done. Poverty eradicated. That's what I care about. In fact is, the people who have had billions of dollars just over the last year had enough money to get rid of poverty 7 times over. Even if you love capitalism, even if you hug it and lug it, you wake up every day thinking it's the only system that works. Okay. Do you really want to deal with the eddies associated with it? And even within the system itself, when you have enough wealth to get rid of poverty as many times over as how, say it's not 7, say it's 3. The fact is, you can do it. Wouldn't the point be, well, shouldn't we just do it? Don't care what you call the system. Don't care what you call it. Fact is, if you organized yourself in a different way to make sure that wasn't an issue. For instance, right now, you have the technological know-how to automate one industry after the next. Why not do that? Why not automate industries in a way? If you want to use government to do something good, use government to do something good in a way. This is, look, we're going to automate certain processes to make sure that the very basics of human needs are met, meaning food, shelter. At the very least, if you were born, if you were raised, you're going to have food, you're going to have shelter. Medicine. If you wake up in the morning and you have an illness, you can have somewhere to go. I don't care if you have a penny to your pocket, you have somewhere to go. I'm getting the point that make sure that the basics of needs are met. If you're going to rate this ecology, okay. I don't like it, okay. If you're going to be rapacious to your employees, okay. I don't like it, but I get it. I understand. You're capitalists. But even under this model, can we at the very least make sure those needs are met? Fact is, though, I don't think you can do that under this model. You have a model that's make as much as you want, get rich or die trying. It's antagonistic. It's competitive. How on earth do you solve those issues in a model that tries to take as much as it can take? What's the saying? The strong do as they may, the weak bear as they must. The point that I'm here, I don't want to get too far into the weeds or far off topic. If you have the capacity to make sure that people have the things that they need and you don't do it, you've failed. Now, the question becomes, failed according to who? You failed according to the value system that says humanity is important and everything else should be relative to humanity. If you have the capacity to make sure people have the things that they need and there's even one person who's in poverty, your system of distribution has failed. I'm not going to keep this one long. This one is around 17 minutes. That's way, way too long. There are 50 people here. That's shocking to me. 95% air. This was on the last video. Thanks for the history lesson. You're welcome. We could just apply a progressive income tax aimed at people like Bezos and improve our infrastructure. Much would improve for most. This is kind of what I'm getting at. I'm not coming at this from the perspective of capitalist, Marxist, socialist, anything. I'm just making this very basic point that we shouldn't allow human beings to suffer. Like, we need to reorganize our standard of what's considered okay and what's considered acceptable. In fact is, if you had a culture that considered people living on the street as unacceptable, then you would have people living on the street. It would be unacceptable. The society itself will organize itself to make sure that didn't happen. It's not the society we have. I'm saying that should be the society we have. That should be. So, I'm not going to keep this long. I have another one that I want to do as a, there's a debate between Sargon and this other cat, Jason Nuru. I thought was interesting. So, I want to leave this here, and I'm going to pull up the debate, so that will be next. All right, guys. I will see you shortly. Thanks, everyone.